Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week, I'm your panel, Charles Max Wood. Dave and Valentino are out, so it's just going to be me asking all of my noob questions to Andrei. Andrei Bondarev is our guest today. Andrei, do you want to introduce yourself? Let people know who you are and why you're famous, all that good stuff.
Sure. So my name is Andrei Bondarev. I've been building software products for a little over 12 years. My tool of choice has always been Ruby. I played around with a lot of different languages, Python, Node.js, JavaScript, some other ones. And I kept coming back to Ruby and its ecosystem, its community. And recently, I've been diving into the emerging AI ML space and taking a stab at building applications with large language models.
Good deal. And we've talked a bit about some of the large language models and machine learning and stuff like that on this show. We also have a machine learning show, Adventures in Machine Learning, if people are interested in that. But we invited you on to talk about vector search, which seems like it kind of splits the difference between the two. Do you want to just talk briefly about what vector search is? Because I have this vague idea, but I don't think I can explain it.
Sure. So vector search, synonymous with semantic search, is the idea of being able to interpret the meaning or concepts from the underlying query, as opposed to a traditional keyword search that just attempts to match your data sets based on those exact queries /keywords that the user passes.
So, for example, I could ask a question instead of just typing in the couple of primary words that I'm looking for.
Right.
That makes sense. It sounds fancy. So how do I go about adding vector search? Well, let's back up for a minute. Why do I need vector search as opposed to keyword search? Like, is there a fundamental difference in experience or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, the answer is it depends, right? And it's you have to look at specific use cases.
Okay.
In some instances, you do want to give the user an ability to search for a specific keyword matches. But the vector search is a lot more flexible in terms of discovery. Just like humans have a hard time communicating with each other and problem solving and coming to a consensus, and when you're searching through a large data set, you don't always know what you're looking for, right? You kind of have a vague idea. You're putting some queries out there, and the faster the system is able to return what you're looking for, or what it thinks you're looking for, the better experience it is overall.
So yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, the speed of return and the accuracy of results, that makes sense. One thing though that I've seen is, you mentioned the large language models, and so a lot of times we're talking about like Chat GPT and things like that people are out there using. And I've had this conversation with a number of people regarding both having Chat GPT, write code, and also just having Chat GPT answer questions, especially when it gets into long form content, recognizing kind of the nuance of the conversation and things like that, right? So if I put a transcript, for example, from my show into a large language model and expecting it to come back with the results, a lot of times it misses, right? A lot of times it's not accurate. Like a lot of times it is accurate, right? So I've been using Chat GPT to do some writing and things like that, or asking it questions. And when I ask it questions, it still doesn't always get it right. And a lot of that's really just depends on the data it's trained on, right? So ChatGPT, for example, is
Hmm.
trained on a subset of the internet. And so where the internet is generally wrong, ChatGPT is also going to be generally wrong. And just to give a little bit more context, I know I'm kind of talking way longer than I want to ask a question, but um, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a parliamentarian, right? So he's the guy that sits in the meeting and makes sure that everybody follows Robert's Rules of Order. And if there's a question about procedure or whether we can or can't do something according to the rules of the meeting and Robert's rules, he's the guy that looks at the rules and makes a ruling. And so he was asking parliamentary questions on ChatGPT, and it was actually telling him wrong answers. And then when he asked it where it got the information from, it would actually cite, it's in this chapter, this section of Robert's Rules of Order, and it was incorrect. And so I guess my concern is, how much data do you have to give this? How much training do you have to give it in order for it to be able to say, if I type in how do I use device on Rails, right? How much training does it have to have, or how good does my data have to be in order for it to give me the right answer?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and also the case you had just built leading up to that question. And you can actually test this really easily by asking ChatGPT to provide some sort of uh, latest scientific papers or research papers on a given topic, and it will
Oh,
just
okay.
it will maybe the top level the root domain will be correct,
Hmm.
um, but what follows then, the actual path, the actual link is completely false, fake. So from a standpoint of vector search, the way vector search works typically is that you would generate embeddings
Uh-huh.
from your data sets. So let's say if you have a database, a list of products, right? Let's take
Right.
a typical e-commerce example. You have a list of products.
Hmm.
Um, you would generate embeddings for every product. Um, that would include different information such as the title, the description,
Okay.
the properties, the sizing, etc. Um, and then the vector search on top of that data set would actually translate a user's query into a vector embedding. It will then go to a vector search database, try to find the closest n number of matches. It would then take those matches, take that data, pass it to an LLM and say, can you synthesize an answer based on this user's question, right? So at any point in time, it's taking most relevant database entries, and passes and uses an LLM to provide a coherent answer.
Okay. So I guess my question is then, is it actually going to try and give me an answer to the question, or is it going to give me links to the products, or what kind of a result are we looking at getting?
It's so as a developer, you can control that.
Okay.
And there's kind of different paths you can take. Um, the scenario that I just mentioned, the LLM is going to try to give you an answer to your question,
Okay.
but you can also augment that answer with, "Hey, these are the links to the referenced products above," because you know
Hmm.
which records are going to be extracted from the vector
Right.
search database when that search is executed.
That makes sense. So yeah. So we could, for example, have it come back and say, so if I ask it, if I have this model of car and which tires do you have, then it could give me a list of tires, or it could explain, maybe these tires are great for off road and these tires are great for on road or whatever, right? And so I can give as
Yep.
comprehensive an answer as I want as the programmer.
Yep. Yep.
That makes sense. And that's kind of interesting just from the standpoint of, like, I run the podcast website, and when I do a search, I generally just want it to link back to whichever podcast episode. But I could, for example, have timestamps and feed it timestamps, and that could be interesting, right? Is, you know, you ask a question, it says, "Hey, in this podcast around this timestamp, right? These hosts discussed the thing."
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, another. So, an example of putting vector search on top of your podcasts, right? So, presumably you have a description for every podcast,
Mm-hmm.
right? A title, kind of the topics that have been discussed. And let's say I'm searching for the word politics, right? So I'm just curious if you guys have
Right.
ever touched on any politics within your podcast, and if with keyword search, if the word politics is not explicitly mentioned in any of your
Right.
show notes, I'm not going to get that answer back. But if there are similar concepts described, adjacent concepts to the
Mm-hmm.
field of politics described in your show notes, with vector search, I will get a result back, right? So
Right.
you may mention that a friend of yours is a parliamentary, right?
Uh-huh.
And so with vector search, if I search for politics, I expect to get that show back,
Right.
that result back.
That makes sense. So, how do I go about building this in? I'm still not completely sold that this is always the right answer. And you said it depends. So,
Of
yeah, it
course.
really, you design the experience you want. You're not locked into the keyword style search, which I think is the point, right? So if you want to design a different experience, you can have it, which is exciting. How do I put this in, right? How do I decide, okay, it's going to give back, maybe a little bit more, a little bit different result or different kind of result. And I want a vector search, right? I want people to be able to say, you know, hey, Chuck talked about politics on this episode. Like, how do I start putting that together?
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of vector search databases entering the market. There's 5, 6, and an ever
Mm-hmm.
growing number of them currently. Um, it's kind of still unclear who will make it through the end of the year, or become a leader over the next couple of years. There's also a lot of traditional database vendors adding those capabilities to
Okay.
existing products. Elasticsearch is doing it. Postgres has a PG vector extension.
Oh, interesting.
Pinecone
Okay,
is a
cool.
stand is it, Pinecone is a standalone, really popular SaaS tool, um, closed source proprietary solution. Um, there are Milvus, Qdrant, Weaviate. They have an open source offering, supplemented with a cloud offering, paid cloud offering. So the field is moving very rapidly, and I think as engineering leaders, you kind of have to assess, in that moment of
Mm-hmm.
time, in time, and do a couple of POCs to try to understand the current capabilities. How big is your data set? How fast can we index that data into a vector search database? What does the infrastructure look like? What are the kind of compute memory, um, um, hosting requirements
Mm-hmm.
needed to run an open source solution? Right? Do you want to maintain it? Do you have people on staff that have those skill sets? Um, and Yeah, go through a proper discovery.
It makes sense. So you said some of them are open source. I don't know that I've seen any. I like the idea of adding it to Postgres since that's usually what I'm using anyway. But
Yeah. So the PG vector, as far as I know, it's not affiliated with an official Postgres
Okay.
project. It's written. It was written as an external extension to Postgres,
Okay.
um, and I've I've read some kind of mixed opinions about it. I haven't used it all that extensively, so I don't want to comment
Right.
if someone is using it and has great results with it. And just to add to that, I mean, some of the other ones are heavily VC backed companies,
Hmm.
and have a lot of resources to pour into the development of these systems. So, um, as far as I can tell, PG Vector is purely an open source solution right now.
Right.
There's no kind of commercial offering or roadmap. So you could just expect that some of the for-profit commercial vector search databases are gonna get ahead.
That makes sense. Um, in your blog post, I did see that you were using Weaviate, and I talked to them a little bit at JS
Yep.
Nation in Amsterdam earlier in the month, and yeah, it was kind of interesting to talk about it. Um, Before we get too deep into some of this, I'm a little curious, like what is the difference between a vector database and sort of your standard relational database?
Yeah. So a standard relational database, like MySQL, right, like Postgres,
Hmm.
I guess SQLite is also could be put into the same
Right.
class. Um, they've been around for a while. People have built a ton of applications on top of them. They work. They're well supported. There's a huge community around them. Um, the whole application layer is also built out, right? If we talk about Rails, the Active Record, the ORM has incredible support for all of those databases.
Hmm.
Um, the underlying solution is tailored to be able to execute SQL queries very efficiently, right?
Right.
Um, and the vector search databases is a much younger type of system, um, and they kind of started from the other end. So they started from being able to compute embeddings, and then also being able to execute uh, uh, basically like similarity searches. Like um, another word for it is a nearest neighbor search.
So when I'm querying it, yeah, it's not doing the same kind of lookup. Um, how do you tell it what a near neighbor is, or how do you tell it what is close to what? Is that part of the large language model, or is that
Mm-hmm.
something else?
Yeah, so maybe I should explain what a vector embedding is in first
Hmm.
place. So a vector embedding has a property called dimension, and basically the length of it, or think of it as an array of float numbers, and how big is that array, right? Whether it's 100 float numbers or 1,024 float numbers, and that is the semantic representation of your data. So that it captures the underlying meaning. And actually, all of those vectors can be mapped out in a coordinate system, but the coordinate system is not a 2D or a 3D dimensional coordinate system.
Okay.
Um, it can potentially have 1,000 dimensions, right? So
Oh,
that's
wow.
where that dimension that's where that dimension property that's what that dimension property refers to. And so when you index the when you index your data, right? So let's go back to that products
Hmm.
example. Um, you generate a vector embedding, right? So a large array of float numbers, representation of your data. And when you take a user's query, you generate a vector embedding from that query as well. So you generate an array of float numbers
Okay.
from the user's query, right? To kind of translate it um, into a vector embedding representation.
Right.
And then there's different formulas to try and find the closest distance between those vectors, right? Between the one that's
Hmm.
coming in as a user's query, and between the ones that are stored inside of your vector search database. Um, and you For your specific data sets, you should test out different methods, but you can calculate the distance based on a cosine formula. There's another called dot product.
Hmm.
um, there's a kind of fair amount of configuration there that you have to test out and see what kind of yields the best results for you.
That makes sense. So effectively, it takes, just to rephrase really simply, it takes
Mm-hmm.
what I give it for my listing. So let's say it's a podcast episode, or in your example, a product, right? And it takes all the information in there and it generates a series of numbers. And those numbers are effectively coordinates in a, n large dimensional space, right? Which is effectively what a
Yep.
vector is, right? Um, I remember in math, in college, they taught us vector was effectively the amplitude and direction, right? And so it's basically from the origin or from the middle out to some point out there, right? And that's your vector. And so effectively then what you're doing is you're saying, okay, um, if I put a search in, then it's also going to generate a vector. And then there are a bunch of different algorithms to determine how close it is in, the 1,000 dimension space or whatever. um, and so it returns all the things that are close to it according to whatever algorithm it has for picking the stuff that's nearby.
Correct. Yep.
That makes sense to me. It feels a little bit like magic, right? Because I convert all this text to numbers, and then magically the other numbers correlate with it somehow, and so that's the right answer. But it seems to work because people are using it. So, I'll take that much of it on faith. Incidentally, when we've talked about like neural networks on Adventures in Machine Learning, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's like we have these weights and their numbers, and we don't know why those numbers work, but we get good results. So, right, it's the same kind of deal.
Right.
Um,
Right.
okay, so yeah, so let's say that I take all of my data and I seed it into this vector database, and I want it to be searchable. What do I have to do in, say, a Rails app in order to make this work?
Yeah. So you can either use a vector search and an LLM directly
Mm-hmm.
and use their APIs. So whether you want to use Weaviate or Qdrant or Milvus, um, and there's a number of LLMs as well to choose from. Um, we've actually been working on a library called LangChain RB,
Okay.
which is a set of abstraction layers on top of all of the different LLMs and all of the different um, vector search databases, in addition to some tools to help you build an application. So we're kind of building much tighter integration into Rails, so you could just plug it into your active record model, um, and index your data as a callback, for example.
Oh, interesting. That's very interesting because I've used like Search Kick. We did an episode actually and talked quite a bit about search, but it was more along the lines of the keyword search with elastic searches and things like that. And yeah, a lot of those give you the same deal, right? Where you can have it index it when it's changed or when it's created, or you can go in and you can say, hey, re-index the whole collection or things like that. So it sounds like you're providing a lot of those same kinds of tools.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the rest of it is just having a driver that sends my query into the database and gets a result back, right?
Right. And we also have tools that just basically make the whole experience, building the whole experience end to end, much easier. So a big part of interfacing with LLMs is also prompt engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So we have tools that let you construct, manage, and maintain your prompts, prompt management. We have tools that kind of make sure that for whichever call you're making, you're not exceeding an LLM's context window. So you're not exceeding the allowed token number of tokens
Right.
to pass. Um, we've also built this kind of data pipeline um, that lets you import full-on files. So if you want to import PDF files, local PDF files, or text files, or Markdown files, or Word docs, we kind of take care of a lot of that plumbing that needs to be done when it comes to parsing the files and then chunking the files before it gets imported into vector search database.
Right. And so this is all done in LangChain.
Yeah, there's a Python. The original implementation is in Python and TypeScript. And as I've been working within this space, I felt like we ought to have our own solution in the Ruby world as well.
Right.
So this is LangChain inspired, Ruby flavored one.
Okay. Is it called LangChain in Python?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious if somebody, came up with some other creative name for it. That's cool. And just looking at the LangChain library, it looks like you connect to a bunch of different LLMs. So you OpenAI, which is effectively ChatGPT, Hugging Face. I haven't used any of the rest of these. So it'll do a vector search by generating a prompt that you send over to OpenAI, and then I get my response back.
Yep.
Very cool. And so conceivably, because this is one area that I've wanted to get into a bit with some of these results, is so let me back up for a second. So effectively then my vector search is just a prompt to an LLM.
Your vector search is a query to your vector search database, and then you take those results and pass them to an LLM to synthesize an answer.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. So I make the query to my database and I get results back, right?
So the vector search is generating an embedding from a user's query, calculating the closest distance to that
Right.
embedding, to the ones found in your vector search database, and you can serve those you can serve those results right away to the user.
Okay. And that's what
If
I've
it's
been assuming.
an open-ended question, if what you're building is an actual Q&A, then in order to translate those results into a natural language, into a natural language style response, you would actually construct a prompt with the original user's question, the results found in the vector search database, an n number of results, and then you would prompt the LLM to write back an answer, giving the results found.
Right. So this is the kind of thing you would expect to see out of like a chatbot or something.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I have my vector search database that has, say, all 4,700 and something podcast episodes that we've done on Top End Devs. And so then, and so it feeds in the show notes and the transcript and the title and the short description and everything else. And then what it does is when it gets all that back, then it constructs a prompt that it sends over to Chat GPT or Hugging Face or something like that and says, hey, this is all the information I have about this episode. Can you synthesize a 2 or 3 sentence response that tells them, hey, according to this episode, this is your answer?
Yep, that's right.
That's pretty slick.
I was going to say, so the main use cases that we try to solve or try to empower developers to solve with LangChain RB are things like vector search, building chatbots, and also building a QA on top of your proprietary data sets.
Okay. So, yeah, and that was the question I was going to ask is, okay, so, yeah, how are people using this? Is it just chat bots or are there other places that you're seeing people use it? I mean, I guess I could imagine that you could get a written out response on a web page for doing a search, but people aren't accustomed to that. So,
yeah, another experimental thing that we've been looking into and built a couple tools for in LangChain RB are agents. So basically, trying to treat an LLM as kind of a general problem solver. And there's a lot of emergent research and different prompting techniques, for example, to try to have an agent execute on general different various problems.
Yeah. So my question is, we're kind of talking about all these interesting solutions. So is this something you're using on your own products or at work somewhere or something like that?
I run a small software development firm, and last year actually we worked with a client, and it's a well-known public company, and they offer data analytic solutions on top of regulatory data, like rules, laws, legislations, national and international. And we helped them rebuild their core application, and a big part of it was rebuilding their search experience. So we built kind of a traditional Elasticsearch cluster and the whole data pipeline and the APIs, the front end to it. And as this AI wave started rolling in this year, I kind of had an epiphany that what we had just built and the project that we had just concluded was sort of outdated because it was a traditional keyword search. And I started exploring the vector search space and all of the different databases. So we're so we're actively working with our current clients to kind of enhance their products with these new capabilities, vector search and LLMs, and working with product managers to try to figure out where these capabilities can be added and where it makes sense to add those capabilities to your product.
And what was your experience putting that stuff together? I mean, it sounds like the toolkit's pretty comprehensive and makes it pretty easy, but did you invent a lot of this stuff as you went, or?
Um, yeah, so I would say that the overall field is still very young. People are prototyping and testing a lot of different approaches.
Uh-huh.
Um, even the whole field of prompt engineering is uh, still kind of a black box.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear why you're getting certain results given certain prompts, right?
Right.
You don't really have much visibility into the underlying system, especially if it's a closed source one like OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The other end of
so
that is that you also don't know how to write the prompt all the time that's going to get you the information you want, right?
exactly, yeah, exactly. We've been looking at a lot of different libraries across other languages as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Looking at how things are done in the Python LangChain implementation or Llama Index. There's Microsoft's semantic kernel.
Right.
There's daily research coming out on the best prompts and how to work with LLMs in general. So we're trying to take all of that, put a kind of Ruby spin on top of it, and offer that to the Ruby ecosystem.
Gotcha. So yeah, um, with what you're building with LangChain, though, did you build LangChain as kind of a, hey, I'd like better tooling on this stuff, or was this something you found and you've been contributing to it since?
No, I'm the original
You're the author.
author,
Okay.
and I've been very humbled and very amazed at the kind of at the amount of attention that the project has been getting. I'm super thankful to all of the contributors and everyone that is actively participating in the discussion in terms of where this library, the direction that this library needs to go, and
Mm-hmm.
what are we missing, what are we lacking, what should be added. Um, we have a Discord server where we're kind of we're a community of people building these types of capabilities into their products, or we're launching new products. So we're in a Discord server, kind of talking about these things.
Yeah, this is super cool, and it's definitely an area I want to explore. And it'd be interesting to see, yeah, which people found more useful, right? Just kind of the standard uh, keyword to link to, here's where the keywords appear in the show notes or whatever. Or, yeah, whether they want more of an answer and then, hey, here's some context right here, the podcast episodes we referenced and the other things that we, right? But yeah.
Yeah, and I
So,
think
no, go ahead.
I, I I find that there is a healthy amount of uh, I find that Ruby community tends to be very pragmatic.
Uh huh.
Um, we focus uh, very heavily on productivity, on developer happiness, on maintainability, on good patterns. good software development fundamentals, not reinventing the wheel, right? Obviously, a lot of those values have been driven by Ruby on Rails, that permeated throughout the whole ecosystem. So, and those are the principles that we're adopting with LangChain RB. So I think, as opposed to some of the other implementations or languages, we're looking at all the problems through that lens, because we don't want to add tooling for the tooling's sake. We want to make sure it's kind of best practices, opinionated best practices, how we think LLM-based applications should be built.
Right. So one other question I have is, like, what's next? What's coming next for LangChain? Let's just start there. I have a few other what's coming next, but yeah, let's start there.
So it's adding. So we'd like to add more vector search database vendors. We'd like to add more LLM vendors as well. We'd like to add support for local open source LLMs as well, so people can people can prototype those types of applications, and we're looking for feedback. Anyone that's willing to provide feedback on whether on the documentation, on the abstractions we have currently in the project. We're very open to any kind of constructive criticism, and definitely want to make sure that what we're building is rooted in real use cases, and not completely invented.
Right. Makes sense. What do you see coming next for vector search and LLM technologies?
I'm hoping that the open source LLMs will catch up to the proprietary ones as well. So be as powerful and also be efficient enough so that developers can run them either locally or on a or host them themselves, so that we're not just tied to OpenAI, because what OpenAI offers right now is they have some of the strongest models currently available. There's also a growing field of task-specific models as well. So models that are trained for specific to accomplish specific tasks, like summarization. So I think, as opposed to using one powerful model, one general purpose model for everything, I think people are going to start chunking out their workloads to specific models. In terms of the vector search space, like I've mentioned earlier, there's so many different solutions. I think in a year from now on, there will probably be less players, based on folks will have just much more time to actually battle test those systems. So I think the number of offerings is going to be significantly reduced, and we'll just all kind of mob over a smaller set.
So just getting started, where do you suggest people start?
Well, I would suggest checking out LangChain RB. and trying to add those capabilities to your existing products, or even checking out cloning the repo, reading through the code base, and seeing how we're doing, how the different things are accomplished, what kind of techniques we're using, what kind of prompts we're using, um, what kind of settings we're using for different vector search databases. I think that would be a good foot on the door if you're a Rubyist.
Sounds good. If people want to connect with you or if they have other questions, is there a good place to find you online?
Twitter is great. I think we can put some links in the show notes, right?
Yeah, we can definitely put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, Twitter would probably be best.
All right. Yeah, we'll put a link to Twitter in the show notes then. All right. Well, then we'll just move ahead and we'll do some picks.
Great.
So I never know if our guests have listened to the show before, so I'll just give you a quick explanation. Picks are essentially just shout outs about stuff we like. So, it can be technical, it can be non-technical. I'll just give out a few examples here. So I usually pick a board game as part of my picks. Now, this last month, I've been traveling a ton. And so I haven't been hanging out with my board game friends, right? Which is usually where I get a new board game pick because it's like, hey, we tried this game and it was great. So I'm going to go back to one that I've played quite a bit on my phone, actually. It's called Star Realms. You can buy the cards, but it is much easier to just play the game on your phone, right? Because you don't have to buy expansions and you have to put it away or, separate them out or whatever. So Star Realms, I wonder if it's on Board Game Geek. So Board Game Geek is where I go to tell people how complicated a game is. I would imagine it's on here. Yeah, it looks like it is. So Star Realms, yeah, it came out 2014. It's a 2-player game, 20 minutes per round. Yeah, that sounds about right. The weight is 1.93. Casual gamer with a semi-complicated game, right? So it's not incredibly simple game, but it's not so complicated that a casual gamer couldn't pick it up. That's kind of what I'm looking at, right? This is a board game weight of 1.93, and I'm looking at a 2 for the casual gamer, right? Somebody who likes a game that makes them think, but doesn't want a game that's super complicated. And so this one's right in there, right? It's pretty easy to pick up, stuff like that. So yeah, I like that. Like I said, you can pick it up, you can play it on your phone, you can play it against the computer, or you can play it against your friends on the app. And anyway, it's awesome. So I'm going to pick Star Realms. And then last week, I took my wife and kids to Disneyland. And so I'm going to do some Disneyland picks this week. Now, Disneyland's a ton of fun. They have California Adventure and Disneyland. And you can buy tickets that allow you to switch parks, the park hopper passes. Those tend to cost about $25 more per person. And since I have 5 kids, that was just a little bit expensive. It's $25 per person per day, and we were there for 4 days, right? So it would have cost us an extra $700 to get the park hopper pass. So what we did is we just got the one park passes for 4 days, and then we just picked a park, and that's where we were for the day. So we spent 2 days California Adventure and 2 days in Disneyland. And oh man, it was such a good time. A few things I'm going to throw out. They did have the Genie Plus passes. Those are also $25 per person per day. We did buy those. Now the Genie Plus, if you haven't been for a while, you're probably more familiar with Fast Passes. The Genie Plus is now the Fast Pass. You have to pay to use the Lightning Pass line. But it was well worth it because you use the app, right? So unlike the old Fast Passes, you don't have to have your park ticket in your pocket and run over to the machine to stick it in the machine. You just tell it, I want to ride this ride using the Lightning line, and then it reserves your spot. And then when you get there, you just scan the barcode on your phone and you go into the Lightning line, and it's way faster. So that was well worth it. The newer rides, so there were a couple of rides in each one. I think there were 2 rides in each one that you had to pay on top of the Genie Pass, in order to get a lightning pass to those. So like the Radiator Springs Racers in California Adventure, there was the new Rise of the Resistance. I think it was because it was new that people really wanted those tickets. Anyway, so they were an extra like $20 per person to, so we didn't pay to do lightning passes on those. But we had a great time. The Genie Pass is well worth it. The other thing that it does though is it gives you automatically gives you the park photo pass. And so when you ride on like Space Mountain or Incredicoaster or some of the other ones that takes your picture, Splash Mountain was closed by the time we were there. That's the one that's probably most famous for having the pictures. It gives you a code. You can put the code into the app and you get a high quality picture. But they also have people with digital cameras around the park, like high quality cameras. And so we got our pictures taken by photographers that work for Disney. And you also can get it at like the character encounters and stuff like that. And you just have them scan a code on your phone and then it shows up and then you can download the pictures off of the app. So anyway, that was worth it. We also stayed at the Grand Californian Hotel, which is an on resort hotel. The perk is you can get into the park a half hour early, right? So we were most of the way to the big rides by the time other people got into the park. But the hotel room itself wasn't that impressive. And overall, I don't think it was worth what it cost, right? Because you can stay in a hotel nearby and then you can either you know, drive in and park at the park, or you can anyway. So yeah, so that's kind of my take on Disneyland. But I've been going to Disneyland since I was a kid, and so a lot of the stuff is more nostalgia than anything else. But it was fun to go with my kids and watch them enjoy it, especially my 7-year-old. She just loved it. So I'm going to pick that, and then one last thing I'm going to pick is I'm looking at about the beginning of August doing a podcasting workshop, and it'll be a 3-month course. And I'll walk you through all the steps of starting a podcast. I've just had so many people ask me how to start one. It's terrific for your personal brand. It's a great way to go if you want to meet people in the community, because almost everybody out there, if you send them an email and say, "Hey, you want to come on the podcast?" they'll come on the podcast. Even the people you think never in a million years will this person who's kind of at the top of the community come on a tiny show like mine, and you would be surprised. They don't care as much about how big your show is as much as they care that they get the opportunity to put the word out and talk about the stuff they care about and see if they can make the impact they want to make on the community. So the other thing is it's also been an opportunity for me to say, hey, I want to meet just general people in the community and put something out there and say, hey, jump on a 15-20 minute call with me, right? And so I get just regular programmers from around the world that we get to talk and see what they care about, what's good about their career, what things they wish they could learn more about, stuff like that, and just make connections. And so anyway, it's just a win-win-win for me. And you don't have to break the bank in order to start a podcast. So if you go to topenddevs.com/podcast workshop, I should have that landing page up here within the next couple of days. And then you can go and you can reserve your spot in the workshop. Right now I'm looking at charging about $2,500 for the 3-month workshop. And then, there'll be a series of lessons, and you'll probably just get the whole course all up front. And then what we'll do is we'll just have office hours calls, right? So you can go at your own pace. If you can blow through it in a week, I mean, it's kind of a lot, but what we're talking about is not just getting it launched and out there, but here's how you actually find people and grow and reach out to guests and all the kind of stuff that you need to know to make it really successful. Like launching a podcast on its own is really not that involved. But knowing who to reach out to and stuff like that. The other thing is that if I know somebody who would be a good guest on your show, I don't mind reaching out on your behalf, right? If you join the workshop. And so it's like, hey, I want, somebody who's been in the industry for 40 years and written 8 books on stuff and, whatever, right? Somebody of that caliber on my show, and I was thinking this person, and if I know them, I don't mind reaching out and saying, hey, I've got some podcasting students. They're launching their shows. They'd like to have you on and see if they're interested. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. And I have gone way too long with my picks. So Andrei, what are your picks?
So I'm gonna pick a show, a game, a book, and a museum.
Ooh.
So the show, so Black Mirror is back for another season. I started watching it, um, and it's phenomenal.
Okay.
It's very dystopian.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's a good show, what I've seen of it.
It's great. Be prepared for an entertaining watch.
Mm-hmm.
So the game I'll pick is a phone game called Polytopia. It's a strategy game. Um, so I'll leave it up to you to check it out, but just warning that you will end up wasting a lot of time playing this game because it's very addicting. I love the
Is it
multiplayer
a
mode.
computer game or
It's a phone game, yeah,
on your phone?
on your phone, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good deal.
The book, I've been going back to this one over and over and over again. It's a very intense read. It's a very heavy read. Super technical. This one's called "Designing Data Intensive Applications" by Martin Kleppman, and it looks at the landscape of different databases. It explains how they work, how to make different decisions when you're choosing between a NoSQL or relational database, how to stream data, batch process, message brokers, etc. It's a great read. And then I'll pick a museum, which is the Chess Hall of Fame here in St. Louis. It is if you're a fan of chess, it's an absolute joy to visit. Last time I went there, they had a Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky special exhibit about that kind of famous rivalry. And I was nerding out in there for quite some time.
Awesome. Yeah, I just looked up the designing data intensive applications because that's something that sounds like it would be an incredibly good fit for our book club. Now I'm going to share another tip. I have Capital One Shopping installed as a plugin on my browser, and it found a place where it found it on eBay for $11 cheaper than Amazon. So, the delivery is not overnight, but if you don't need it tomorrow, right? Anyway, so I'm going to throw that out as a help if somebody's looking to buy it. But yeah, that looks like an amazing book. So, and it's showing that there's an audiobook too. All right, cool. Well, thanks for coming, Andrei. This was super fun. And yeah, another thing for me to go play with. Another cool technology. Yep. But yeah, thanks for coming and talking through this. This was fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was great.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here, folks. Until next time, max out.